Chapter 10, Credit Markets. Now, this is going to be a really important topic for two reasons. One, it's really important to explain a lot of things we're going to work on for the rest of the semester. So we're going to build off of this in the credit market we develop in this chapter. And some of the ideas in banking are going to show up again. Two, credit markets are currently very important. So we've got this sort of economic crisis potentially brewing in our economy here in spring of 2020. And so a lot of that stems from what is going on or potentially could happen in credit markets. And so understanding what these are, how they operate, is going to help us get a better perspective on what things are happening currently. So as per usual here, we have a number of learning objectives, which I've laid out here. So I won't go through them in order now, as you can see them there, but we'll touch on each one when we get there. But this first video here is just kind of an introduction to the idea, get you thinking about what a credit market is and why it may exist in our economy and what function or role it might play. So the question I'm asking here at the beginning is, when you get a loan for a new car, so let's say some of you have gone to a car dealership and purchased a car, even a used car. And for a lot of you, buying that car meant you had to get some financing, which is a loan, either from the dealer or from a bank somewhere. So when the dealer gives you financing for a car, so you have some monthly payment associated with that, and it had some interest rate that they quoted you when you started, where does that money come from, right? So I go to the dealership, and I buy a car for $20,000. Okay, and I'm not going to give the dealership $20,000 today, even though I drive off the car with the lot. So where does the dealership get the $20,000 from, right? So, and where do you get the $20,000 to pay for the car? So you might say, well, the car dealer is floating me the loan, and that could potentially be possible, right? What kind of throws a wrench in that story, and this is true in a lot of cases in the economy, is our particular car dealer, they have to pay the manufacturer for the car. So if you go and buy a Chevy, just a V there, and you buy a Chevy for $20,000. Well, the Bergstrom, let's say you buy it from Bergstrom, they have to send $20,000 to Chevrolet to pay for the car. They already had to at some point to pay for the car that you're going to drive off the lot with. So the dealer can't really just float you the loan for $20,000 because they have to come up with $20,000 to pay Chevrolet. So that would effectively make their cost $40,000, which might be a little bit harder to finance all of those car purchases. That's a lot of cash for a car dealer to keep around. So it's not really the car dealer directly, although some of them may have their own banks that finance it. But in the end, who's ultimately giving you the money, even if you're getting the financing at the dealership, that financing is coming from a bank. Okay, so there's effectively a bank operating behind the scenes that is going to give the dealership $20,000 in order for you to drive off the lot with your car, and then you're going to make payments effectively to that bank in the future to pay back the loan. So, all right, so the bank is the one that gives me the $20,000 as a loan. Then the next question is, where does the bank get those funds from? So the bank has to give the Chevy dealer, in this case, let's say Bergstrom, they have to give Bergstrom $20,000, which Bergstrom is going to send to Chevrolet, the manufacturer. So where does the bank come up with the money from? And the answer is, this is all happening in what we call a credit market. So in a credit market, we're bringing demand for credit which is going to come from borrowers. Right? So that's you wanting to borrow $20,000 in order to buy a car. You're a part of demand for credit. And the key question then is, where does the supply of credit come from? So this is who we call lenders. And as we'll see, that's ultimately coming from people saving. So we have a total amount of money in our economy that's created income, right? That was our GDP. And so some of that income goes into consumption, and some people save that income. So the total amount of income that's saved and accumulated over time is credit that's potentially available for somebody else to get as a loan. And so we're going to go through the details of this. Some of this might be a little bit unclear now, but as we learn a little bit more about the credit market, you'll hopefully understand the ins and outs a little bit more clearly. Now, this credit market is really important for the economy to function well for a lot of different reasons. So one way that the credit market matters, so you need to be able to get credit to make big purchases like this. So cars, houses, those are an important part of the economy, and they rely on consumers being able to get financing for those purchases from banks. So if the credit market were to stop functioning properly and borrowers were unable to have access to funds, that starts to affect other parts of the economy, especially in purchases of durable goods. So the housing market starts to do poorly. It's harder to buy and sell houses. It's harder to buy goods such as cars. And so that has a big hit on the economy potentially. And we've seen that in the past when the credit market starts to seize up. It also affects businesses' day-to-day operations. So one way that businesses function, it's not true for all of them, but a lot of them this is the case. There's obviously a delay, right? So I have to purchase some things. And we know that, well, when I build something, I need intermediate goods. That's what I mean. I have to purchase some things. So I'm going to have to do a bunch of work and pay a bunch of workers and buy a bunch of intermediate goods before I actually get to sell my goods and get the revenue for it. So for some firms, especially smaller firms, I have to borrow money in the credit market in order to finance the production of my goods and services today. And I pay the loan back at the end of the year when I get paid my revenue from the things I've sold. So that's really important just for production to take place. If the credit market was to stop working, it's harder for banks, or so it's harder for these smaller firms to get the funds they need to pay their workers, to pay their suppliers, in order to produce the goods they can later sell. So when they're unable to do that, they're unable to produce, and that starts to work its way back down through the other parts of the economy and can potentially become a very large problem. So we'll hopefully get a wrap on this credit market, understand some of the basics of banking, and that'll make this seem hopefully a little bit less mysterious.